93.9 777.
So I guess the first things first. By the way, I'm Anna. I didn't really introduce myself. I'm kind of flighty. Some people, specifically my mother, like to call me. So, yeah. But I had John in class, and I'm a sophomore. I don't know.
And you're doing the co-op program.
Yeah. I did the Velvet Ashes retreat last semester with my Women in Culture Life class, so I got to hear some of what you had to say. But yeah, so that's kind of who I am. So I'm not just this like stranger. So yeah, if you guys just want to kind of tell me your story generally, and then questions.
Where do you want us to start?
Do you want to start in college? Just give me how you guys got to specifically to missions, and then to Bahrain, and then back and.
Yeah. So, let's see. I don't think either one of us came to Ozark thinking we'd end up overseas. We both had overseas experiences before college, but I don't think we really felt like, oh yeah, this is totally for me. So my first year at Ozark, which was her second year at Ozark, we met, and we had started dating the end of that year, so around April. Was kind of when we started dating, and we had both decided that summer to go on internships, kind of. So I went to Tanzania for 2 months, and she went to Vietnam for a month. Yeah. And it just kind of happened by coincidence, I guess. Also, my first year, I was involved in, we used to have traveling ministry teams that would run during the year. And so there was something called a missions ministry team, which we would go out on weekends and kind of go make presentations at churches and stuff. And when I first came to Ozark, my first semester, I wanted to preach, and like they wouldn't let me preach because I hadn't had like official preaching class. I was like, well, that's lame. And I was talking to a friend of mine. He's like, you should try out for a missions ministry team because I want to preach, and that's what I'm doing. So like, okay. So me and my friend tried out, and we were like the only people who wanted to preach who tried out. So we were the designated preachers for our missions ministry team. And I think in the grand scheme of things, that also probably played a role. Being on that team, even though I just wanted to preach, it helped to mold and shape some of my heart for missions, and got me thinking about what God was doing in the world in a way that I hadn't really thought about before. And so after our summer experience, I think it was really eye-opening. I guess I'll speak for me, and then you can give your perspective. Okay. For me, it was like I had done some trips in high school, Mexico, Haiti, Honduras, like doing VBS and helping build houses and stuff like that. So I thought that was cool, And I went to Africa and spent a lot of time doing nothing. Like the one time we were like going to go out and do like preaching or something, I got like super sick and I couldn't go, so I just stayed in the house and was really frustrated. And I think God used that summer to help me realize that He was more interested in me than and necessarily what I could do for Him. And like it was, I think, a good taste of what normal life was like on the field. It's not so vastly different from life in the States. And so I think all of those things, I kind of came out of that summer thinking, like, I don't know if I really want to do, if I want to go overseas, but if I do, I feel like I have a much clearer idea of what that is going to look like. So, you had a different experience altogether.
Yeah, I mean, prior to the Vietnam trip, my freshman year was when September 11th happened. It happens every year, but I mean, the September 11th. And I came to Ozark. I did the co-op program. I'd been on short-term trips, but I didn't want to go overseas at all. But when that happened, it was obviously like a really big deal, and I remember like just being sick to my stomach about it and thinking, like, who would do this? Like, who? Because I'm trying to process this back in the dorm room after watching the news and stuff. Like, who would do something like this horrible? And I feel like God really spoke to me in that moment. He said, someone that doesn't know me is capable of doing something like this. And I remember saying, like, oh, well, I need to go tell them. And I remember, like, it was a very defining moment, because it was like, I knew, once I heard the words come out of my mouth, like, I'm alone in my dorm room, but, like, once I, like, had voiced that, it was like, take it back, don't send me, you know? Like, I didn't want to do it, but it was like, I don't know, like, seeing God's heart in that moment of, like, someone who doesn't know me would do this. And so I kind of, like, tried to avoid any mission stuff, but I felt like I needed to go to Vietnam. And then when I went to Vietnam, I felt like I wasn't necessarily like, oh, I should do this for the rest of my life, but I was more open to it. Like, I feel like God very slowly opened my heart to being able to go. And then when we had come back from that first summer we were dating, he seemed like he was more interested in going. And so I was like, okay, well, if I'm going to stay with this guy, I need to seriously consider it. But I still kind of fought it a little bit. And then, yeah, it was just like little things along the way that God, not necessarily, like, I don't feel like it was necessarily a calling, but I feel like it was like a growing willingness to go. And it then grew into like an obedience thing. Like, I'm asking you, will you do this? And, you know, we said yes, and then we didn't know what that looked like. We knew we were curious and interested, and God kept bringing across our path opportunities to go to them, or not really go to, but like learn more about the Muslim world. And so we kind of was like, okay, well, maybe this is where God is leading us, but okay, the Muslim world, that's still like, okay, where, you know, like it wasn't like a certain country or certain people group. It was kind of like Muslims. Okay, all right, so what does that look like? And so, yeah, we just kind of kept pursuing that. And got other things going on. Of course, we like finished Ozark and moved to Arizona and did like an internship there. And then
But I think even when we graduated from Ozark, I think we had, by that point, we had a pretty clear sense.
Probably go overseas for a season.
Yeah, that we didn't know how long, but part of the reason we went to Arizona was to spend time with her family, because we knew they wouldn't really be on board with us going overseas, and so we wanted to kind of be near them for at least a year. So yeah, it was I think undefined, but we sensed that's where we were headed. So yeah, we moved to a certain area of town because a guy that was a friend of a friend had spent some time in Iraq and knew of this, you know, Muslim kind of student population near ASU in Tempe, Arizona, and so we wanted to go live there. He was moving there. We're like, hey, let's do it together. We'll kind of live in the community. And like a couple weeks before, he backs out, and so then it's like, well, I guess, I mean, we're still going to Arizona. We might as well move in here anyway. Moved in there, then got to know some other people who were reaching out to some of the students there. Those ended up connecting us to this internship that was associated with Frontiers, this missions organization that exclusively targets Muslims. And then I started working then at Frontiers kind of halfway through my time. I worked at their front desk. I was a receptionist at the front desk. And so we kind of see in all of these things God moving us forward. So we knew, though, that we were headed to grad school in Chicago at Wheaton.
Which was kind of another interesting piece, because the degree that John was interested in getting was like very much his spiritual giftings and like interests, but it didn't fit in the Muslim world at all. And so we're kind of like, should we do it? Should we not? Like, how is it worth it? Anyway, it kind of all came together, I think, because there was a scholarship he was able to get where like people who are wanting to go overseas, they'll pay for, essentially, in the end, they pay for your degree. And so it's kind of like, okay, well, we might not see how that particular degree plays out right now, but we feel like God was saying do that, and we'll see. Like maybe it's like for a different season that he would be doing that, which is kind of cool now that he's back at Ozark because it's very much in line with like what he's doing now. So yeah, we just kept walking those little steps that God just kind of put the desire in our hearts to follow that. I guess it was like years. I mean, this was like from the very first. That was like 2001 where I first had that moment, and we didn't leave for the field till 2011. So we're talking like 10 years of God like slowly, and I think looking back too, I think it's God's grace, because had he told me, had I felt like in the beginning I was going to go, or feel like he asked me, I would have been like, no way, you know, like I feel like it was God's grace, like this is what you can handle. I know you're going to be obedient, so I'll give you these little baby steps, and we'll, you know, all of a sudden I'm like, whoa, how did I get here? Like I'm signing up to go overseas, and I don't know, so it's kind of cool to see that.
So when I graduated from Wheaton, we had no idea where we were going to go or what we were going to do. So we kind of just started pursuing some options, and within a couple months had it narrowed down. Had kind of about 12 different options. None of them we really knew too much about, but it was just kind of like, well, we've got to make a decision sometime. And so, we kind of prayed through everything and sensed that we narrowed it down to two, and then both of us kind of separately sensed that God was kind of giving us a choice, and we both felt led to choose Bahrain, and so we didn't even know where it was, so we had to get a map and look. But yeah, we were kind of excited. It was an opportunity to basically Frontiers had this program, and they were in Iraq for a long time, where they were training short term. Basically, it's anybody who is interested in serving overseas long term but isn't quite sure where or if that's actually a thing. They could go and get kind of 6 to 12 months of experience on the field before they made a commitment. And so this was a program intended for that. They had been running it in Iraq for a long time, and now they were wanting to shift it to the Gulf, and specifically to Bahrain. But they needed people there to kind of run the program. And so it was kind of a opportunity for us to train and for us to kind of help lead, but also at the same time an opportunity for us to help minister to people there. And so we decided to go, and we spent about a little less than a year and a half raising support, and then kind of organizing everything and getting everything ready to go. And November 2011, 2010. November 2010, we did a month of training out in LA, in Little Arabia, and then December 22nd, 3 days before Christmas, we got on a plane and moved to Bahrain. So, yeah.
So you were going to run this program for Frontiers?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So that was going to be kind of our the ministry side of things.
So what did that entail, like actually in Bahrain?
So we went over with a team of 3 people besides us. Our job, it was kind of weird that first team, because I had been on like a week and a half trip to Bahrain over the summer prior, but that's really all the experience I had, so I didn't really have any idea what I was doing. And
so trying to like help them get cars, and we don't even know how to get cars, or like get a place to stay, and we're like, we don't have a place to stay.
Yeah.
So there was quite a learning curve that first team.
Yeah, it was just all. I mean, we were essentially in charge of kind of the logistics, and then kind of the helping them adjust well and kind of get used to the culture. And so that, that first team was a little bit strange. We were only there for less than 2 months before the Arab Spring started, and which hit Bahrain really hard, and protests broke out in the streets and people were killed, and they pretty quickly, it wasn't very long before the government issued basically martial law for 6 months. And so everything was in lockdown and really chaos. So in a lot of ways it was, I think, God's grace to us, and arriving when we did, we got a little bit used to it, but not so used to it that we just felt totally thrown off, because it was like, well, we didn't have much of a routine to break anyway. And, it was, just a real time of learning and super interesting. Then by the time the next team came, which this team was like 7 people, we had a much better handle on what to do and how to help them, and we were much more hands-on getting things lined up before they arrived. And then once they got there, then every week we'd meet and we'd kind of talk about things and just kind of make sure they were sorting through things well. So that was kind of hitting all major areas. They were doing well, physically and emotionally and spiritually, and in regards to ministry, and in regards to professionally, right? They were thinking about things, and so trying to just kind of help coach them through all those things.
When were your kids born?
Emmett was born the day after I graduated from Wheaton, so he was a year and a half when we went. Madeline was born after we'd been there about 6 months. Eviana was born a year and a half after that, so both girls were born in Bahrain. And then Rowan, our youngest, he was born about 6 months after we moved back.
Okay. So what was that like for you guys then, transitioning to parenting, especially when you'd only been there a couple months and all of this chaos broke out, and from moving from relatively safe America to somewhere to a culture where you just have you've literally just moved and it just completely goes up in flames, and especially having the background of what happened on 9/11 and all of that. What was that like for you guys?
Yeah, it was really difficult. Well, we had spent a year and a half convincing our families that we were going to a safe country, and then we got there and then that happened, so they were like, what? So that was difficult to navigate through, but I think just on the parenting front, it was really hard because really that year and a half before we left, we didn't want to be tied down to a lease or anything, so we lived with John's family for the first 6 months, and then we lived with my family. I guess it was 8. I don't know. It was kind of divided in half. So we lived with his family, and then we lived with my family before we left. And so they, my in-laws and my mom helped us a ton, and then all of a sudden all of that was gone, and I was we didn't have any clue what we were doing, just the shock of a first child. Thankfully he wasn't newborn still. It was we made it through the first year, which is a pretty big thing. But so I feel it was huge because it wasn't just it wasn't only adjusting to culture, it was adjusting to a life changing thing. How do I not just as what does missionary, I hate that word, but what does that look like? But it's no, what does a mom look like? It was very, I don't really know what the words are, but
well, yeah, we had spent so long living with family that we had never really had to be parents on our own, and so moving overseas then required us to not only learn how to raise a kid in a foreign context, but really just how to raise a kid in general.
Without family, we didn't have anybody around to watch Emmett or anything, so it's I have to figure out how, what does, not just what does grocery shopping look like, but how do I take care of this kid? When I, even in my American context of our home or whatever, what does that even look like? So there was, I don't know, it was really hard. The first year, I think, is probably, the most difficult, hands down. Just learning all of that, and then kind of once you've been through all the seasons and you start to repeat it, then it's okay, I have a basis for something that we can build on instead of it just like all being new. So yeah, I think that was probably the hardest. Probably almost harder than adjusting to the culture, I would say. I didn't really have a whole lot of exposure to the culture the first year because I was doing all these other adjustments, and where we lived, we weren't necessarily, we didn't know, we had no idea like where the locals lived. There's like a large expat community there, and we ended up kind of in a pocket of like Indian worker, Sri Lankan. So like, you know, we had neighbors who were not American, but like that's not who we were trying to target. So
they were like Christians or Catholics.
Yeah. So the first year was kind of like adjust to being a mom. Don't worry about the culture stuff yet because we're not really around it. And then I feel like after that was kind of like, okay, I can now focus. Like my focus can be expanded a little bit into like more of that. And we did end up moving to a different location that was right next to a village. You know, we just kind of knew better. Like we were like learning and like, okay, this isn't, you know, like if I'm going, because we only had one car, if we're only going to have one vehicle, and my ministry is then decided by who's around me and like what I have access to, then this doesn't really make any sense because I'm not around Bahraini. So where can we move in? We had some friends who had moved into a village and were like, come join us. And they knew Arabic, and we would go to the park in the village, and it just made more sense for us there. So yeah.
So you said the first year you weren't really around the culture, but how did the culture, like once you were immersed in it, what did that look like in your home? How much did you like let that into your home? How much did you try to keep it American?
We wanted them to be in our home. I mean, I think that was kind of our expectation going in. Like, you know, we'll make our home look like a Bahraini home. Like, we'll do that. And then we kind of quickly learned that they do not feel comfortable in our homes. And just because of this American stereotype, like they assume that everybody eats pork and everybody drinks alcohol, and you know, like even though we would tell them, they're like, well, yeah, even if you've used, you know, if you've eaten pork like one time in your pan, it could still be in there and it could still contaminate or whatever. Like it was like crazy, like like not really logical, but it was like there was a fear there that they didn't want to. So if they were brave enough to come, John had a guy who came over. He only stayed for like maybe 30 minutes, and you could just tell he was super uncomfortable the whole time. We're like, as when we would get invited into their house for tea, they would expect you to stay for hours, and it was like, okay, like this just, you know, you just kind of adjust, like, okay, they're not welcome here, so, or they don't feel welcome in our homes, no matter if we make it look exactly the same. So what can we do? And so like kind of the first part was just like, we would just, okay, so how can we get invited to where they're at? Like, let's just do that. And so, and this is speaking for me, because John, the men and women are like totally separate. Like I don't even know what his friends look like, and he didn't know what my friends look like. So this friend Jenny and we would go to the park, and she spoke Arabic. So she, this is funny to think of it this way. This is kind of how it worked. She, like, her job was to get us invited to someplace, and my job was to, like, wrangle the kids and pray. So we just kind of tag team it. So we would try, you know, to get invited to weddings. We would try to get invited to people's houses for tea. Like, we would just kind of, like, she would kind of figure out, you know, what are they talking about, and she would show interest, and then she would kind of, like, oh, we want to find out about this, you know, and she was really good about it. Like, we often would get invites to do stuff, you know, even if it was, like, a funeral, we would just play the American card, like, can we just come and see? And then, you know, we'd get invited back and that kind of stuff. And so that's kind of how we dove in once we realized they weren't willing to come to us. And then I feel like once because we were definitely students, like when we were in their homes, it was like, okay, we're learning. How do you do this? What does hosting look like for you? What does this look like? And then Jenny was wanting to then figure out how we could contextualize the gospel to what they wanted. And so then we figured out how to, well, she did, I should say. I didn't really do it. I was just kind of along for the ride and praying through the whole thing. Well, I was a sounding board. Like, she's like, what about this? I'm like, yeah, okay, well, what about this? But, so we would do, essentially, it was kind of like a Christmas party, but it looked more like what they would do in the women, you didn't go into a mosque, but it was like their meeting place. Where they would sit and they would listen to the story being read from the Quran, and they would all eat together. And so what we did was then we did that. We were like, well, what about, they would do it for all of their prophets. They would have like different meetings where they would go. And so after we had become friends and we were established enough, Jenny would say, well, if we had one of these to honor our prophet, Isa, Jesus, would you come and honor, because we've come and honored your prophets, would you come and honor ours? And so then we made it look very much like what, we actually did it at Jenny's house. And because the first one that we did, you could tell they were all really nervous. But I think by the end of it, once they realized, like, it looked just like, and we had food catered in, we're not cooking, like, it's safe, like, we're not serving you alcohol, we're not, we're not doing anything like this, we're not even touching the food. But this still had it look exactly the same, and like she read from an Arabic Bible the same way that they would read theirs, like, she just very much contextualized it, and then by the end of it,
so like they're sitting in the living room, she like reads
in a microphone that's like horribly echoey. You can't. Oh, it's terrible.
Like
sound.
You have to turn the echo up a little bit. Like, hello.
Yeah.
That's like what.
That's what they do. That's how it goes. Like, their sound equipment is. It is what it is. But.
Oh yes, this is so nice.
Yeah. So anyway, that was kind of our chance to like share the gospel. So then at the end of the Christmas party, we're explaining that in America you give gifts, and this is our gift to you. We gave them all Arabic Bibles, and they totally ate that up. Like, some of the women were like, "Can I have one for my cousin? She wasn't able to come," and they would take them, and they use social media differently, so they would like post on. I mean, it was like crazy. They're like posting, "Look what Jenny, the gift gave." Like, they're posting, they have Bibles, and people were like wanting Bibles from those posts, and like it was just really cool to see. But yeah, like all of that took however many years to be able to establish that. And now Jenny is, I mean, she's still there, and she's still doing those things, and she's like more women are interested in coming, and it's just cool to see. I don't know how learning about the culture can, I don't know what I'm trying to say. How much of a difference it made, like, being able to adjust our expectations. Not if we didn't just try to keep them coming into our house. It was like, we have to go, and we have to be students of this, and we've got to then figure out, how does Jesus fit into this? Like, what does that look like? And I feel like Jenny was really good at that. Like, that was like something that her Arabic was really good too, so she has the ability to do it. But I don't remember what the original question was. I'm trying to do that. Your turn.
I don't remember what the question was.
I'm going to be honest, I don't remember what the question was either.
One thought, just as you're talking, I feel like, going over, I felt like there were so many things. It was like, okay, I'm not going to be American about this. I'm going to be very contextualized, and I'm like going to present it in a way, that makes sense to them. I'm not going to expect them to do our thing. And I think the longer I was there, the more we realized, like, it's just not that like, neat and like clean and black and white, I guess, And so I had a lot of experiences that were very much, like, I had a lot of interactions with guys in a very different context than she did, but they were very much in their world, like yeah, I was going out with guys at night, and they smoke shisha, and we'd sit around and talk and drink tea
and eat dinner at like midnight.
Yeah, and like that was very much in their world, and so things would come up, and sometimes we'd have spiritual conversations, but I felt like that was one of the things. It was like we were just talking and trying to have spiritual conversations, and trying to help them see who Jesus was, and so that was a very like contextualized approach, if you will. Whereas something like before I went, I think if I would have judged, like, you know, sitting around with guys smoking shisha and drinking tea at 11:30 p.m. versus having a Christmas party in your house, you know, you'd be like, well, that's definitely more contextualized. And yet, it seems like there was something about these parties, I think probably because of the way that they were done, that really seemed to take hold. Like it opened their eyes to things. I remember this one Easter they had a party, and they had printed off these pictures of Jesus with his arms outstretched, and it said in Arabic, "I am the resurrection and the life." And like those pictures were all over Instagram. It was like everybody was like, you know, posting that. And like, so all these people in Bahrain were reading in Arabic, "I am the resurrection and the life," you know. And so it's just like I feel like over time it became okay. So God, I don't know what you're going to do or what you're going to use, but like we'll just kind of try a bunch of things and see what works and what doesn't. Yeah, I found often it was different than what I thought.
So, is their culture like more like, is it like, it's honor shame obviously, right? Because they're Islamic, but then is it like relational? Is it like, did you find it easy to like become like, once you were able to get into their space, did you find it easy to like get to know people, and like were they receptive of you? Or
I think generally people were receptive. Unfortunately, we came in knowing virtually no Arabic, and we didn't. Bahrain's one of the few places in the world that you can function with English, even though it's like English is one of their official languages. All of the signs are in English and everything. So I learned, maybe you would feel the same way. I learned more Arabic in my last year than I learned in the previous 3 combined. And that's because we finally had started a program at the institute where I worked. And so I was taking classes, and that was just the way to learn. Because of that, it limited our interactions to people who spoke English, which tended to be the people who were more open-minded and kind of more Western anyway. And so I feel like we had pretty positive interactions with them, but I think a lot of that was just because they had already overcome a lot of their barriers and issues with us, you know, because they had learned English, and it's, you know, language and culture are so tightly intertwined. The interactions we had with people who did not know English as well, you know, sometimes those would not go as well. There was definitely some fear, you know, they were afraid of us and kind of really suspicious of us in a lot of ways. But I feel like April in the village, you know, these women that she was, that they were reaching out to, like these were women who, like, most of them did not know hardly any English. You know? And so I think at the beginning they found that they tended to be a whole lot more suspicious and closed off. And over time I think they found that they were more receptive. I feel like there were several people that were kind of, even from the beginning, very hospitable. Now, and I guess there's a difference between hospitality
I was going to say they're super hospitable though.
Accepting. So they would welcome you into their home, you know, even if you were like walking through the neighborhood, you know, there would be invitations. Oh, you must come and eat, you know, at my house. It's like, you have no idea who I am, and you're inviting me to come eat at your house. But so they were really hospitable. But as far as like trusting you, I guess, and being willing to like have a relationship beyond that kind of initial meal or something, I feel like that's something that took time for people. So.
Well, and I feel like too, they're super relational. Like their families are really their life. Like they don't really have. I mean, they do have friends outside of that, but it really is primarily family. I mean, it's like, you know, every Friday you go to your father's house and you spend all day with your family and you eat meals and stuff with them. And so I feel like that was kind of part of it too. Is like they only let us in so far just because we're not family. Like, that we're limited because we're not. And so I feel like, especially for Jenny now, because she's still there, I feel like she has certain families that she's in with, like, because she's been really intentional about meeting the mother and meeting all the sisters and building her relationship with the family, and so she's almost part of that family. You know what I mean? Like, that's kind of, I don't know, relationally how they work too. But yeah, I feel like for them to host us, back to the hospitality thing, was like a huge, it would bring honor to their house. So they were very eager to do that. Like, even, I mean, I remember one house we went to where they had like no furniture in the house, which, I mean, culturally they don't really have like couches and stuff anyway. But like, it was very clear that like they did not have any money, and yet they still like invited us over multiple times and, you know, did the whole meal and stuff. So yeah.
Did you find that the women interacted with you differently because you had children? Did that like?
I feel like it was very natural, and it was more. It was also of a mentality of like, your kids are my kids. Like, it takes a village to raise them, and so, I mean, that was something that I wasn't super comfortable with. Like, when, you know, one of the girls would, like, they have their room that they host in, and oftentimes they would like take one of the kids and want to go show someone else in their family, like, just, you know, introduce whatever. So like, my children were out of my sight, and that got to me a little bit. But yeah, it was very much a, you know, they're always, it made it easier. It was like a natural thing. Like, there were things that, you know, I was able to do, you know, that some of the single interns weren't, like, they didn't get those kinds of opportunities. Like, they had very different opportunities that they were able to do just because of their life's season or whatever. So yeah, they would always offer parenting advice, whether you wanted it or not.
Yeah.
And yeah, they would just take the babies and hold them, and I mean, the grocery store, we always had people coming up and touching them and that kind of thing. So yeah, it made it easier.
Did that also make the transition from like living, once you got accustomed to the culture, did it make the transition from being so far away from your family like easier? Or was it more like?
No, because I wouldn't say we had, like, we didn't have close enough friendships where like I could trust them to like babysit our kids or something like that, where you would, you know, times where you wish you had parents around, like, hey, can you watch the kids so we can go on a date or whatever. I think we just didn't get that far. I mean, there were other teammates and stuff who, like Jenny and her husband, they kind of took that on, that family, so in that sense we had family, but it wasn't really the locals that satisfied that. So
And John, you taught at the local college, right? Is that?
There was a institute that, so it was like it was started by some people who had been there for a while, but it's like an English language institute. So that's not what I initially had come. That's not like the visa I initially come on, but I transitioned to that after about 4 months. Yeah, was there for the rest of the time.
So did you find, like, was that the best way to get, like, especially since you didn't know very much Arabic, was that the best way to get kind of, entered into the culture, like, interact with the men?
Yeah.
And
I mean, I think it was an excellent way. I don't know. I don't think it would have been the best way, but I think perhaps maybe I could say it was the best way for me. That's kind of where I was at. So the guy who kind of ran the institute was a guy like-minded who knew Arabic really well, and he's one of these guys who, you know, like just speaking, he picks up on language and stuff, and he's just really personable, really outgoing, and so he never was actually teaching in the classroom, but he had, tons of relationships, and he was going out with people all the time and having great conversations, and so I feel like that was really natural for him because he could kind of slip in and out of Arabic. But for me, it was great because it was like, probably 80% of my relationships started in the classroom, with guys that I'd be working with, and then it's like, hey, what are you doing? Do you want to come on Thursday night? We will eat lamb at this place. Like, all right, let's do it. So, yeah, a lot of that, I think, it was because we were doing that. Then, and also being a younger guy, a lot of the guys that I was working with were my age or several of them are older, but there's like that teacher line, so they felt there was like a respect that they offered to me, which I think probably was partly because I was just their teacher. So, yeah.
Was there, I know in like the Chinese context often like if you teach English, if you speak English, it's like a status thing. Is it the same in like the Middle East, or is it just like?
I don't know. I think it probably is like, perhaps to a degree it is. Mostly because it's like if you speak it well, it's probably because your parents could afford to send you to the British school or something, where you would learn it. But I never perceived that was how people saw it. So if it was that way, I think it was probably more of probably not like super apparent or like the first thing that people would think of when you spoke English, if that makes sense. So, but there definitely was I think there is a direct correlation in Bahrain between the income of basically between the people's knowledge of English and their income level. So, yeah. All the English classes that we would offer. We had a couple contracts with the government to train college people who were entering college, and almost always the people who would come to try for that, they'd have conversations with us. Almost all of them were lower income, and then the ones who were better tended to be, you could just tell, they had a little bit more money in the family.
So did you have the opportunity to like disciple a lot, or did you feel more like you were often just like a stepping stone?
Mm-hmm. Definitely a stepping stone. So there were a couple of people. There's only about 50 Bahraini believers. And when we were there, we saw a couple people come to faith, or saw a couple people get baptized during our first year, but they were Saudi. And within all of the people that were there, we know of maybe two Bahrainis that came to faith while we were in the country.
Mm-hmm.
And that's with the efforts of probably
and there
50 to 100 people there who were.
And I don't know how many workers that you could say, but obviously when you're only seeing that little amount of fruit, when somebody does come to faith, everybody wants to be the one to disciple them.
Yeah. It is awesome, yes.
It is awesome, yes. But then it's so now suddenly all these Americans are interested. Yeah. And so for us, it was just kind of we're not going to, we didn't want to jump in on that. Had they asked us, of course we would have willingly done that. But we were we don't want to you have enough Americans interested in teaching you the Bible.
And unfortunately, it burned several of the new believers believers because they got, you've got all these different people who are giving them. Well, your real problem is that you're not learning to listen to the Spirit. And if you could only speak in tongues, then you would understand what the Spirit has to say.
Yeah, different denominational.
Well, your real problem is you're not going to church on Sunday morning. You gotta be going.
So they would get conflicting advice.
Yeah.
And so, I met a couple of guys who were believers. I was tutoring one guy for a while, and I mean, he had been like kind of active in the church and stuff, but we literally like never had a Jesus conversation, and it was like our relationship stayed pretty professional, even though he knew probably who I was and what I was doing, but he had been really burned and like had just kind of closed off everything. We would have conversations about how did he deal with his family who were Muslims, and just kind of like talking him through some of that, and letting him know I was praying for him. But so in the face of that, then kind of get back to your question, much of what we did was just we felt like planting seeds. So the guy who ran the institute they had gone to the Arabic church for a while, and there was a guy from there who he had been kind of discipling. So we of course longed to have fruit and to be able to disciple some of those there, but it never happened. Never happened while we were there. So we just kept plugging away. It's hard getting to feel like you're doing something and you keep wanting to see fruit and nothing ever happens, but we're just really glad we got to be part of it for a while, and really kind of humbled by those who had been there for years before us and who are still there, and they've had similar experiences to us, where they haven't really seen people come to faith. And so we just keep praying and asking God to do something. So, if I was doing any discipling, it was mostly the Americans, kind of helping them work through some things, and stuff like that. So I think for us too, I don't think either one of us feel, or maybe April actually, but especially when we went, I don't think either one of us felt like we had the gift of evangelism in any way, shape, or form. And April might.
Not then. No, I'd say.
But anyway, I think we felt like our strengths were more of in terms of discipling. So anything we did anyway, we felt like we're kind of out of our area where we feel comfortable.
I feel like I'm probably preaching heresy.
Well, it wasn't so much that. It was just like
it
was just hard sometimes.
Awkward and uncomfortable.
Yeah, to bring these things up and to start talking about Jesus, and to try to see if we can meet them where they were at and try to help them see their need for Jesus. So we had good conversations, but.
Can I ask what, have you noticed any, things about Bahraini culture, that, your son was 1.5 years when he moved, and so he, would have been able to grasp at least some of the concepts, or at least, latently? Have you noticed, any, habits or things that he has, even now that you've come back, that, could be attributed to, your time in Bahrain?
That's hard.
Probably not directly. I mean, there were Arabic words that we've kind of adopted into our family vocab that our children still say, which is kind of fun. And I think our idea of family and community that was shaped largely from us living there has transferred. I think, where it's they his siblings are his friends, and that kind of.
I think our sense of time, a lot of that was shaped. It's more of the intangibles. But
Yeah, and I think that probably wasn't directly from Emmett being in the culture and picking up those things, but us, that shaping, like, because we're learning how to be parents, that culture is shaping us, and so it's like like not directly related to that, but
he also had well, first of all, they don't discipline, general rule, they don't discipline their kids until they're 7. So they say, you give them anything they want until they're 7, and when they're 7 you crack down until they're 14, and then you let off. And so, generally...
Like, they are very unruly children.
They are
like
little boogers.
Yes. Like, I would go in, and Emmett is a very sensitive boy anyway. He's not a rough and tumble kind of guy. And, I mean, I would sit on visits and I would watch boys climb out of windows and watch them, like, literally, like, climb walls and, like, I mean, they do whatever they want to do. And so Emmett was kind of like, like, they
just throw stuff, they throw, punch each other
hit,
in the
they
face,
yell at their parents, like, they're just...
They'd scratch. They were...
way different.
Generally pretty unruly. Plus, if there were any kids for Emmett to hang out with, it would be from the village. Well, their parents don't even speak English, so they don't speak English. Emmett didn't really know any Arabic, and what little he did, he wasn't a super adventurous kid. And after a while, we pushed in certain situations, and he kind of started to resent it.
Yeah.
And he did not want to go out and be around Arabs. He did not like that. And so, we tried not to push it too much on him. So I think part of that, it's like there's so many things about our experience that I, just like thinking back to when I was in school, like what would I have thought about some of the things that happened. And I think I always would have thought that, like, oh sure, our kid will be very, adjusted to the culture and other things. But I think it was just kind of a part of Bahrain, just as a result of kind of all of these factors. He just didn't have much experience with it. So he misses the food.
Well, it's interesting. It's interesting. Like, when we talked about moving back, he was so excited. It was like he was done with Bahrain, and he wanted to be home near cousins. It was not like we lived that close to them anyway, but just the idea of like being back close. He was very, very happy about moving back. So he transitioned back really well because it was like he wanted to be here. And anytime we would talk about Bahrain, he kind of shut it down. Like, he just like, no, I miss it. No. Like, I think he speaks more fondly now of Bahrain that some of the time has gone by where he's, done it. But I think had we stayed in Bahrain, because he was getting to the age where, like, he was having to interact more. Like, he couldn't just sit, with mom. Like, the boys are expecting you to go play. You got to go play. And I think that had we stayed longer, that we would have had some major things to work through with him. So I think it's part of God's grace to Emmett that we came back when we did, because I think he. He speaks fondly. Like, I mean, not often, but like I'll hear him say now, like, "Mom, I miss Bahrain."
Or like he wants to go back.
Yeah, and he'll say things like he wants to go back, or like when we were learning Arabic, he did not want anything to do with it. Like, we would say, we'd practice, we'd try, and he like hated it. But he's even made comments about wanting to learn Arabic and things like that now. He's kind of, I don't know. He's remembering the Rosie, I think. He's not remembering the...
Which is probably good.
Yeah, that's fine.
Especially, like, if you guys were ever to go back.
Yeah.
That'd be really great.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I don't want to take up too much more of your time today.
Yeah, I'll need to go get the kiddos from school.
But yeah, I appreciate you guys being willing to, like, sit down and, like, talk with me, and I hope that I don't ever, like, step over a line when I'm, like, asking questions. That's, like, my biggest fear is